Some years ago, a young father took his young daughter to the pet store to purchase a much promised and much anticipated puppy. When they went in, the little girl began to examine all the dogs. And after about an hour, the father was a little anxious and ready to go, asked the daughter, "Have you made a decision?" And the daughter said, "Yes." And he said, "Okay, which one do you want?" And she pointed up front to the front of the store, and she said, "I want the one with the happy ending." And she meant the little round puppy that had not stopped wagging its tail since the time they entered the store. She wanted the one with the happy ending. And I think most of us are like that. We like happy endings. We want happy endings. I think there's probably a few of us here would have appreciated Margaret Mitchell had gotten Rhett and, Scarlett together at the end of the book so they could have gone off together and gotten healed up and had a good family life. There may be a few of us that would appreciate John Cameron letting Rose and Jack have a relationship after the Titanic. Maybe Jack didn't drown. They could have gone on with that big old diamond in the safety deposit box. Yeah, we kind of like happy endings, and maybe that's why in the Christian church we really love Shrove Tuesday. We get all excited about pancakes and sausage and Mardi Gras. But then we forget Ash Wednesday. We don't participate much in Ash Wednesday. And then we jump over Good Friday. Maundy Thursday. And we jump over Friday and Silent Saturday, and we like to get right to Easter. I heard a couple of weeks ago a store in our area who was advertising and supporting an Easter egg hunt 2 weeks ago. Way before Easter. It's sort of like at Christmas time. We start singing Christmas hymns after Thanksgiving. We want to get there quickly. But life doesn't have many happy endings, does it? At least according to the news reports we get on television every day. And I have to admit that, after a few minutes watching the news, you almost get depressed, and you just want to turn it off. And I have to admit that when the plane disappeared, the Malaysian plane disappeared, there was a period there where I was praying that it had been kidnapped or adverted to some other field, because I knew if it had been diverted, there was still some hope. There could be a happy ending to it. And now you hear about the ship that has overturned and all those students on board. It's just tragic. And we yearn for happy endings. John Mansfield some years ago wrote a beautiful poem, and in the poem it's about a mother whose son had been convicted of a crime, and it was punishable by death. And she was standing there the day he was to be executed. There was the gallows, and she watched him being led to the gallows, up the stairs. She watched as the hood was put on him and the noose was put around his neck and then tightened. She was there when the trap door sprung and his body stopped suddenly at the end of the rope. She was there when he was cut down and laid there on the ground underneath the gallows. And she ran over to him and she scooped him up into her arms, and softly, over and over again, she said, some things are too broken to mend. Some things are just too broken to mend. It's terrible to believe that existence is not only shattered and broken, but existence sometimes can become so broken and so shattered, so fragmented, that we think that there is no hope, that the things that are broken and shattered cannot be put back together, cannot be mended. No hope for a happy ending, in other words. If we go back into the Gospels, we see another mother. whose son has been beaten within an inch of his life. He's been ridiculed, spat upon, and a crown of thorns stuck on his head. She's there when he's dragging that cross through the streets of Jerusalem. She's there as he climbs the hill to Golgotha. She's there when the nails are driven. She hears the thud of the cross going into the dirt. She sees the blood running down the cross. She hears the Romans making fun of him. She hears him say, "It is finished." And I can imagine Mary at that moment thought, some things are too broken to mend. Some things. Love and its duties do not end with death. There are responsibilities. A burial had to take place, and the hurried burial was done because the Sabbath was approaching. All the things necessary for burial had not been done. So when first light took place on Sunday, the women rose to do those things that had been left undone. And burial preparation was women's work. It was left for women to do. They bathed and he anointed the body with oils, and they would wrap it. So on Sunday morning they go and they have all the things they need in their hands as they approach that tomb. And as they get closer in the twinkling of that first light, they realize as they get close to that tomb that that stone has been rolled away. Now that didn't bring hope to them. It brought fear and anguish to them, because the first thing that goes through their mind is the Roman soldiers have stolen him away, and they're humiliating him. They're desecrating him even further. I can imagine they dropped what they had. Mary runs back to town. She tells Peter, and John and Peter run back to the cemetery, back to the tomb. John, being the younger of the two, gets there first. But John reverently does not go into the tomb. He stops at the opening. Peter, the older of the two, gets there second. And you know how impetuous he is. He goes right on in. He goes in and he sees the burial cloth lying there. He sees the face cloth over to the side. They don't know what to make of it. When Jesus was alive, they heard him preach and teach about life, death, and resurrection, and they couldn't connect the dots. So how are they going to connect the dots now? They don't know what to make of this. So they leave. They go back to their homes. They go back to town. And Mary Magdalene remains there. We don't know why she stays. Maybe her legs feel leadened. Maybe they are so heavy she just can't walk anymore. Maybe she's so disappointed she just wants to sit there in that place and mourn and grieve. We don't know. But as she peeps into the tomb, she sees two figures there. We don't know why they weren't there when John and Peter looked in, but they're there now. And she peeps in, and one of them says to her, "Why are you weeping?" And I can imagine her eyes are red from the tears, and her breast is wet from the tears raining down on her. And they ask her the question, "Why are you weeping?" Well, you know, the young people today have an answer to that. Duh. You know, I can imagine there was a duh in Mary. What do you mean, why am I weeping? Don't you know what's taken place over the last 3 days? Don't you know about Jesus? Don't you know about how they crucified him and humiliated him and how we buried him here? Don't you know all those things? And then the second one speaks. Same question, but add another one. "Mary, why are you weeping?" And then the second question, "Who are you looking for? Who are you seeking?" And Mary doesn't say, "Duh." She's broken, she's shattered, she's battered, she's tattered. She's not angry. She just wants Jesus back, and she says, look, if you're the one who stole the body away, just bring him back, and I'll take the body. Just give him to me. And Jesus says, Mary. And it was in the naming. It was the naming of her. It was in that word, Mary, that she recognized the voice of Jesus. You know, maybe that's a lot like us sometimes when we're broken and we're shattered and we're tattered and we have no hope. We don't know where to turn. That oftentimes it's right then, it's right there when the holy creeps into our existence and we hear our own name called out by the Creator. And it's in that Mary is involved in the second resurrection. The first resurrection is God's hand pushing away that heavy stone. The second resurrection is the stone being rolled away from Mary's heart. And she goes from darkness to light. She goes from hopelessness to hope, from sadness to joy. And it's that way for us. It's right there in the midst of our brokenness that oftentimes we experience the holiness of God. Some of you have heard me speak of William Sloane Coffin. He and I met while I was a student at Wofford College, and I had the joy of being his reluctant valet for 3 days. And how we met's a story in and of itself, and it's rather comical too, and I'm not going to share that with you this morning, but it is interesting how we met and how we became friends from over a 3-day period. And Bill was, his biography is, he was an OSS officer during World War II, and after World War II he became a CIA agent. He was a spy for the CIA, got the calling while he was in the military. He ended up going to Yale University. He became chaplain of Yale University, became the pastor of Riverside Church in New York City, the church that the Rockefeller boys built and Emerson Fosdick pastored during World War II. Now, Bill was the kind of character you either loved him or you didn't. There was very little middle ground. You had people that would hug the stuffings out of him, and there were people, when you mentioned his name, they would spit on the ground. I mean, that's just the way it was. He was a lightning rod for some people. And he was a principal in the civil rights movement back during the 60s. Maybe that's why they didn't like him so much. But Bill and I became close, and we shared cards through the years. And then his son, Alex, died, was killed in an automobile accident. And when Bill's son was killed, it almost crushed him. And when he reflected on the matter, he quoted Hemingway. Hemingway wrote, "The world breaks everyone, and then some become strong in the broken places." But when Bill talked about this death in his own words, he said this, "My heart is mending, and I have relearned one lesson. Love not only begets love, it begets strength. My own consolation lies in knowing that it was not God's will that Alex died, that when the waves closed over his sinking car, God's heart was the first heart broken. And finally, I know that when Alex beat me to the grave, the finish line was not the Boston Harbor in the middle of the night. If a lamp went out, it was because, for him at least, dawn had come. So let us all, seek consolation in that love which never dies, and find peace in that dazzling grace that always is." As I prepared for this sermon and thought about Bill, I remembered another story. And I realized that we were coming upon the anniversary of a tragedy here in the United States. And it was the shooting at Virginia Tech. We had 17 wounded and 32 students were killed that day. And, it shocked us all. And I remembered a story that I read about 2 months after the occurrence. And it was about a mother, Marion Hammerman, and her daughter, Caitlin. Marion heard about the shooting, and she immediately texted her daughter at Virginia Tech. And no text returned. And she said that was very odd because the texts were almost immediate between her and her daughter. So she did that a half a dozen times or so. Still no return. So then she called. And she said as the phone rang, she kept saying, "Please answer. Please answer. Please answer. Please answer." Nothing. So she and her husband get in the car and they drive the 10 hours to Virginia Tech. And they're herded into a room with some other parents that hadn't heard a thing about their children either. And they noticed chaplains coming and taking couples back. And they would hear the crying after the door was shut. And finally, the chaplain came for them. And he said, "I'm sorry to tell you, Caitlin died about noontime today." And Marion said she went into an absolute rage. She was angry at everybody, everything, and she was angry at God as well. She couldn't make sense of any of it. The sorority sisters stepped in and tried to nurture the family as much as they could, but after 4 or 5 days, they have to get back to class and do the things that college students do. And Marion said that as the days progressed, the anger just got deeper and deeper. And she had carried Caitlin's stuff back home and had put her computer laptop on her desk in her room. And one of those days, she went by and she just picked up the laptop for no apparent reason and opened it up. And at the top, there was a Post-it note. And it was in Caitlin's handwriting. And the Post-it note said, "Lord, I know that today nothing can happen that you and I cannot handle." Now, when her parents died, Marion handled it. It hurt, but it was part of the natural order. When her sibling died, she handled that. It hurt, but it happens. But it's unnatural to bury your child, and she just couldn't get beyond what had happened. And the words that were on that Post-it note, although she knew Caitlin believed every word of it, she couldn't understand why that child had to die. So with nowhere to return, she began talking to God. Well, not exactly talking. She was cursing and yelling at God. It was more like shouting. And she begged for answers that didn't come. Why did this happen? Why didn't you protect my daughter? And God was silent about Caitlin. And out of frustration and rage, she began buying books on spirituality. She raced through them. She began reading the Bible, something she hadn't done since Sunday school. She was looking for something. She was looking for an answer. She wanted answers from someone, anyone, from something, anything. Something to make sense of it all. Sometimes little things would happen to cause her to think about Caitlin's Post-it note. Those words would just kind of pop in her head. God, I know today nothing can happen that you and I can't handle together. And 4 months later, those words popped into her head again. And then they went from her head to her heart. And then they went from her heart to her soul. And she didn't hear the words just in her own voice. She heard the words in Caitlin's voice. And after Caitlin's voice disappeared, she heard those words in the voice of the Holy. And they warmed her very center, she said. They warmed her being. And the rage just started falling away. She suddenly believed those words and that they had within them the certainty that one day she was going to see Caitlin again. Not in this life, but in the one to come. And she prayed this prayer. Lord, I don't understand Caitlin's death. I'm pretty sure I never will in this life, but I know you're with me, you're present in my life, and Caitlin is in your eternal care. You see, Marion had been moved from death to life. She has gone from darkness to light. She has gone into resurrection. The heart has been resurrected. So no matter how broken, this is the meaning of Easter. No matter how broken things might seem, even if they appear too broken to mend, God can mend us with a holy weave. God can take the broken pieces of our lives and knit them back together again. Make us whole once again. Frederick Buechner, a Christian theologian, wrote, "Resurrection means the worst thing is never the last thing." Think about that. Resurrection means the worst thing is never the last thing. Now, you may have come here this morning with the darkness and despair that this world pours upon us and dips into our souls. It may be your first Easter without a parent, a spouse, a child, or a dear friend, and you may feel far too broken to mend. You may have come here with a sense of hopelessness, terrified of the future, embarrassed about the past. You may feel broken and unmendable. You've come here all dressed up like an Easter egg, but down deep inside, there's darkness. You fear the world, the one you're inheriting, the one you are sending your children and grandchildren into. You fear your health, the bump, the knot, the cough, the headache. You're afraid of the relationship that's changing in your life. Will there be enough money at the end of retirement? And if you came here thinking that things in your life are too broken to mend, then you're wrong. You're wrong. Mary and those disciples thought that way, but Easter became a gift in the midst of their despair. Their broken hearts were restored. Their broken hearts were made whole once again. Where there was darkness in the light of Christ, where there was darkness, the light of Christ shone brightly. And where they were once afraid of death and hidden away, they were out in the countrysides and the highways and byways proclaiming the resurrection. Easter reminds us that things never become so broken that they cannot be mended. God can stitch us together again with a holy weave. Put us back together again. And when God's hand weaves together the broken pieces, when it's God's hand that stitches us back together, then we become strong in the weak places. We become strong in the weak places. Christ has risen. Christ has risen. Christ has risen. May we pray. Oh God, let us go from this place and live out our lives as Easter people, people mended by the very hand of your throne, people who have been made strong in the weak places by the resurrection of your Son. Lord, give us what we need to be an Easter people in a Good Friday world. Amen.